Labor is demanding a national response to the bushfire emergency, arguing a temporary compensation scheme doesn't go far enough. The Prime Minister has unveiled a plan to pay volunteer firefighters up to $6,000 to support them through the season. All states and territories have been invited to apply, but so far the payments are only available to crews in New South Wales. Joining me now live to discuss this is Liberal Senator Eric Abetz. Senator, appreciate your time. Thanks for joining me this morning.
A pleasure.
Labor wants payments made directly to individual firefighters. Why should it be given to the states? Why is this a state issue?
A number of issues, but first of all, a big thank you to our firefighters, especially the volunteers and their families that are putting themselves in danger to keep us safe. So let's get that on the record, and a heartfelt appreciation from all their fellow Australians. Bushfire management has been a state issue since day one, and as a result it is appropriate for the state governments to look at how they deal with their rural fire service or their country fire brigade, and Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, as always, has struck the right chord and got the balance right in providing this one-off situation for the states in circumstances where we have had some volunteers saying it's inappropriate, others requesting it, and here we have the Prime Minister, I think, getting the balance right, and it's appropriate that the states administer the money, albeit it will be federally funded.
Should these payments be made permanent, particularly given that this sort of a bushfire season has almost become a new normal?
Well, that is what we're being told, but if you go back in Australian history, we have had these horrendous fires on an unfortunate but regular basis. So let's put all that into context. Former Prime Minister Paul Keating, if I recall correctly, back in 1994, had a one-off payment for volunteer firefighters, and I think doing it on an as-needs basis is the right approach, because that way you keep that fundamental volunteer spirit within the country fire service or rural fire services, which is, I think, so important and an integral part of the fabric of our rural fire services. So Scott Morrison yet again has got the balance right, and we've got some people barking and snapping at his heels from either side, but Scott Morrison's walking a very clear path, indicative of the way that he runs the country.
You mentioned Paul Keating, and back then this was a law. I mean, could this have now been done through federal legislation instead of a deal through the states?
Well, we are a federation. State governments are responsible ultimately for the management of their national parks and forests, etc. And so that's where the first responsibility lies. As a federal government, we seek to provide assistance, especially with aerial firefighting equipment, and now with this proposal or this scheme where those volunteers that have had to do a lot of work, who might be financially compromised because they're protecting our community, being appropriately compensated. I think the balance is right. Scott Morrison's got it right, and let's deal with this on an ad hoc, ongoing basis and see what is actually required. But the main thing today surely is that we need to fight the fires and give whatever moral support we can to our firefighters and assure them that our prayers and our thoughts and very best wishes are with them.
What about other volunteers, for example, lifesavers or the SES? Don't they deserve compensation too?
Well, that is where you get into the aspect of volunteerism, which I sought to address just earlier. And if there were people required to be doing life-saving, let's say 7 days a week without a break, then that might be the case. But one of the great things about the Australian ethos is that we are a country of volunteers who are willing to pitch in to support our fellow Australians without expecting any reward or any compensation for it. And so I would hate to see the spirit of the volunteer in Australia being diminished by every single volunteer being paid. And that is why quite a few of the rural firefighters are in fact not supportive of schemes for compensation. That said, I think you need to get the balance right, and in the current circumstances that we face, these payments being made by the federal government to New South Wales at this stage, but I think every other state will come on board, will provide that sort of balance that people can volunteer without then facing a situation where their house mortgage might be in arrears or where their small business might no longer be able to operate properly. So they're the circumstances we've looked at, and I think in a very real way provided assistance without diminishing the volunteer spirit.
The Labor leader Anthony Albanese came out yesterday saying that this temporary compensation scheme doesn't go far enough and is calling for a national response to this bushfire emergency. Will the coalition consider a national response here?
There's no problem that the Labor Party doesn't see the opportunity to throw even more money at as somehow resolving it. The situation is that we as a federal government have made, I think, a very good move in this area to compensate those that are in genuine need as a result of their selfless service to the nation. But the spirit of the volunteer needs to be maintained in all of this. This is part of the strength, part of the ethos, and if we start making payments, I fear then that the volunteer spirit will be diminished, and I suspect a lot of the involvement of the genuine people that want to be of community service will also be diminished and will go elsewhere.
Liberal Senator Eric Abetz, thank you for your time this morning.